Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Democracy and General Purposes Committee. I'm Paul Cooper, and I'm the chairman of this committee. For those of you who are hard of hearing, the meeting has started. I have received apologies for tonight's meeting from Councillor Bartlett, Councillor Perry, Councillor Mrs. Rose, and I don't believe there are any other apologies. I can't see anyone. And substitute members, so I'll go around the room. Councillor Wilson.
Yep, substituting for Councillor Rose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Webb. Councillor Garden.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Substituting for Councillor Perry.
Perfect. And Councillor Forecast.
Substituting for Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Moves us on to item number 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any urgent items this evening, and there is shaking of heads next to me. And item number 4, notification of visiting members. There are none in the room, and I can't see any electronically. Item number 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures this evening, members or officers? Perfect. Item number 6, disclosures of lobbying. I declare that I have been lobbied on items 14 and 15. Are there any other disclosures of lobbying? Councillor English.
I've been lobbied by a number of members on both items 14 and 15.
Thank you. Are there any other notifications of lobbying? Perfect. Thank you very much. Item number 7. I propose that we take all items in public session this evening. I see no reason for the contrary. Is that agreed, members? Perfect. Moves on to item number 8, minutes of the meeting, which was held last on the 20th of November. Is there any comment on the accuracy of the minutes from members? Perfect. In that case, I move that they be signed as a correct record. Is that agreed, members? Perfect. Number 9, I'm not aware of any petitions this evening. Number 10, question and answer session for members of the public. I'm not aware of any questions from members of the public. And item 11, questions from members to the chairman. Again, I'm not aware of any questions. Item number 12 is the committee work programme, which is in your agenda pack. Is there any comment on the agenda work programme, members? I take that as a no. In that case, is that noted? Thank you very much. Item number 13, reports of outside bodies, if any. There are none. Moves us on to item number 14, the one we've all been waiting for. The Policy Advisory Committee and Overview and Scrutiny Arrangements, Governance Review 2023-24. And I hand over to Mrs. Woodhouse to introduce her report.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So, in light of the all-out elections this May and a reduction in councillors from 55 to 49, this committee agreed to review the arrangements for policy advisory committees, overview and scrutiny, and also to look at whether there was a need for a new, easier to use and apply constitution. To deal with the Policy Advisory Committee and Overview and Scrutiny Committee arrangements, a workshop was held in November, which was attended by 19 councillors. The workshop considered different models, and out of the 5 models presented, Model B, which was Cabinet plus Policy, Overview and Scrutiny Committees, scored the highest with 11 votes in favour. The current model received 4 votes, and a revised version of the current model, similar to KCC's model, also received 4 votes. As a result, I've brought forward a report setting out more detail on the 3 options for the committee to consider. The committee is asked to consider and decide if they believe a change is needed to the model for policy advisory committees and scrutiny. A change in model will need to be considered by council and result in changes to the constitution that will need to come back through this committee. Maintaining the present model will not require a recommendation to council, as the review sits with Democracy and General Purposes. With regard to an easier to use constitution, if such a constitution was deemed appropriate by the committee, this would require additional meetings, and it could either be formal committee meetings or working group prior to then presenting that to Council for adoption. So I'm just letting you know, but ball's in your court. Happy to take any questions, as I'm sure my colleagues are as well.
Mrs Woodhouse, thank you very much. I've come to Councillor English.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Clearly there's been a lot of discussion on this. I think there is one change that we probably do need to make, and with hindsight it was an error to continue with having 4 policy advisory committees. There probably isn't sufficient work for 4. However, in other respects, I think the Constitution, which was very, very deeply considered by a cross-party working group, run past a very professional law advisor in Mr. Simon Gocher, has worked reasonably well, and that we should not be rushing to change it. I suspect that there will be, people who were unsatisfied with the move away from the committee system, and there are people who welcome that. But this has been an attempt to provide something of a hybrid model. I think there are people who criticise the Constitution's operation, but I actually do believe that to a very large extent that's down to some people not taking the opportunities of the Constitution. For example, give a very small example, a number of councillors have complained of late of service issues by various departments of MBC. Under the constitutional change, any member can turn up to the Cabinet and ask for a service breach to be considered. As of yet, no member has done so. So I'd say there's a lot of opportunities in this Constitution as it stands that have not been used. And I also believe that the overview and scrutiny function has worked quite well and has avoided the partisanship that infected that model in the previous Cabinet overview system. So I'd like to propose no change from the current model other than reducing from policy advisory committees from 4 to 3.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor English. I'm quite content to second your proposal from the Chair. The only thing I would just ask some clarity on, my understanding at the moment is that the lady sitting to my left has the ultimate responsibility as to how many policy advisory committees we have. Personally, now I also am aware that the lady to my left came under an awful amount of pressure to keep 4 packs this year. I wonder, do we want to be so prescriptive going forwards?
Quite prepared to drop that requirement. I think it's a recommendation that we should adopt next year, but I'm quite happy to leave it to our esteemed officer to make that choice based on the Cabinet portfolios that may or may not exist post-election.
Yeah, and as Mrs Woodhouse just said to me, she can certainly take into account the views of this committee. So I'm quite happy to second. I've got a number of speakers. I think Councillor Jeffrey just got in before Councillor Cox, so I'll cover you two and then over to Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I must say I disagree with Clive. I agree with you, Clive, on certainly on the fact that we're probably not using the Constitution to its full extent, and I think that's something to be noted. I must say the PAC model, which is A, isn't it, doesn't seem to have worked, in my opinion. It feels very, very frustrating. It feels like it's got absolutely no teeth at all. And when we disagree with recommendations, they're simply overturned. And I'm not saying that would be wholly different, but the POSC model certainly alludes to having a little bit more teeth behind it. So I'm much more in favour of the option B, the POSC model. I've got a question though in there. One of the issues about the current overview and scrutiny arrangements is that it's chaired by the Leader of the Opposition. There's no note or no suggestion about how the chairing might happen in option B, and it would be interesting just to see if there had been any thoughts on that.
I will allow Mrs. Woodhouse to answer, but my guess is it is up to us to come up with a procedural rule should we take that course of action, but perhaps Mrs. Woodhouse could elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, correct. It would be a choice, but you're right to raise it, and it's something if the committee did go down that route, when it then came to writing the constitution, doing the changes that would go with it, that would be part of your consideration. In our previous arrangements, when we previously had cabinet scrutiny, it was a rule that it was chaired by a party who weren't the administration, and we have similar now. But as they would also be advising cabinet, I think you'd have to balance what would be appropriate. But yeah, it'd be a member decision, so it's something we'd have to take into account, and you'd have to decide when looking at the model. But it's a fair point and right to raise it.
Thank you. I'd next come to. I assume. Sorry, Councillor Jeffrey. I assume you had finished. Yeah. Apologies. I next come to Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. You stepped over very quickly the different constitution, the easier to use or the plain or simpler or whatever you want to actually call it. Has that been sent out to us? Because I did a search for constitution, got the ordinary one, so I haven't had a chance to see that, but that's not necessarily a problem for now.
You may have mistook it for a piece of children's literature, for the words were so
Oh,
short.
you mean it had
Cox.
round window, arched window, and circular window on it? Okay, right, that's fine. I really do. I hear what both of the previous speakers have said, but I would like to point out that when we had the very good workshop, and I think we interspersed, talked about it, gave each other's views, and the votes that are here, very democratically, show that B was the one that was the most considered, I believe. Now, if you look at representation of parties that were there, we were sadly lacking in your party because I don't know. But anyway, so it may be that there would have been more people voting if more people had come. But I still think that we are with a new system. We do have a cabinet. That's not what's up for contention. But I think the Policy Advisory Scrutiny Committee would take on board the amount of knowledge that each one of those packs will build up. And if you have to then duplicate it to have a second overview and scrutiny for each one of the packs, then I think that's going to be very difficult to try and get that amount of information and enthusiasm for what you need to produce an overview and scrutiny report about. I think the packs have taken on that knowledge base, and I think it would be very strange to try and just eradicate that and say it's fine, you can have another group of people that will try and get all up to speed about something and then try and play the overview and scrutiny position. I feel that, in all honesty, it's worth trying this because there seem to be people who did want to put this on a pedestal, and I think it could work. I certainly think there were ones I would want to discount straight away, but certainly I would be leaning towards option B. It was one that I was wanting to have, even through the work that was done by the subcommittee that looked at this 18 months ago, whatever. So that's what I'd like to say at the moment. I'd like to hear everybody else before I propose another amendment or amendment to what you've already put forward or a different proposal. So move on, please. Thank you.
Councillor Cox, thank you very much. I next come to Councillor Webb, followed by Councillor Garden.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm not very keen, Councillor Cox, on the interpretation you put on, well, let's try a different constitution, because that's all... Okay, a different... Yes, because I think, I think we've got to look at this in the reality that this is a borough council, and a couple of years ago, the constitution was rewritten by a very competent set of councillors. And those councillors put together this constitution. We're barely 5 minutes into that constitution and people want to make changes. I can understand why, because anything new might need tweaking. But in reality, the constitution has got a 5-year life. And I firmly believe that that 5-year life should be used. And then after that, because we're going into an election in May, that the new councillors will be able to adjust to that new constitution. And I just wonder how many councillors have actually read the constitution. You know, it is a difficult read, and it is a difficult read because it's for legal interpretation in case we get into a pickle. The point that Councillor Cox makes about, well, if there had been more councillors there, the vote would have changed. Yeah, perhaps it would have done. But every councillor had the opportunity to attend that meeting. And just because only 19 did, perhaps a lot more should. But in the democracy stakes, yes, 19 voted. But we are here at a policy advisory committee, and we can only advise whatever the recommendation is. And I am firmly of the view that we leave the Constitution as it is. I think overview and scrutiny, although I've been beaten up twice on overview and scrutiny by various councillors, I think it works particularly well. You know, you have an open voice on there, scrutiny does work, and I think the outcomes of scrutiny have been very strong this year. So I would like to second the motion rather than the chairman, actually, if the chairman's listening.
Sorry,
I was going to suggest that I actually second the motion rather than you as chair.
Please do.
Because I think it's better if it comes from the body of the pack rather than the chair of the pack.
I would be delighted for you to second.
Okay, well, I'd like to propose, second the
You'd like to propose that you second?
I'm seconding, yes, thank you.
Seconded.
I got that out all in one go, so there we go.
That's fine.
So I'd like to second Councillor English's second proposal, because the need for change is we're not ready for it yet, and we don't need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Councillor Garden.
I've never been a great fan of the system we've got at the moment, the Model A. And I slightly tend to disagree with Councillor English that our current scrutiny committee in particular is very well working. However, looking at the municipal calendar and being so close in front of the election and treading a lot of new land with less councillors available next year, from 55 down to 49, possibly a lot of new councillors joining this chamber, I think now is not the time to change. Like a lot of my colleagues, I think there is a lot of merit to be had in Model B, although on the workshop I think I was one of the 4 people who voted for Model E. So I think if the new chamber, the new councillors, after they embedded themselves into their new post, once they have to feel how the system operates and how they can improve the system on their watch, it would be a good time in 12 months from now to readdress this issue. And I'm sure some sort of compromise, possibly Model B, may emerge then. What I would like to give on the way to the new chamber after May is also to consider reports of outside bodies. When we had the committee system many years ago, an outside body representative could come back to the committee and actually explain what happened on the outside body meeting. Nowadays, that sort of facility is missing. I wouldn't even know who to represent my outside body report to. So I think once this model system of administration, once that is being reconsidered in due course, we should also consider outside bodies and outside body responsibilities.
Thank you, Councillor Garton. Can I separate your 2 points out, if I may? So the first point, I think, is a good point, and the second point, I think, is an even better point. I think it would be difficult for us to tackle this evening the question on outside bodies, but the Constitution is quite lacking in that regard. And I suspect proper protocol needs to be written. Would you be happy for me to request from officers that it be brought back to our next meeting as a proposed constitutional change? Yep, I'm happy to propose that. I know that we now have two proposals on the table, but perhaps informally we could ask Angela. And I'm looking around; I don't see any dissent on that particular notice. But we could invent some wording on the hoof now, which I'm not sure is adequate. I think it is better that we can consult. So thank you, Councillor Garton, and I hope that you're happy with that proposed course of action. Thank you. Next to speak, I have Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to come back on the points that were made by Councillor Garton. You could look at the flip side of the coin and say, let's assume we might get 20 new councillors out of the 49, just for argument's sake. So if they are told, here's your constitution, here's your way that it all works, it doesn't matter that you are saying, well, it's new, because they've not worked it before. So therefore you're taking on something that can be looked at with fresh eyes, and something, the system, we're saying, is not completely broken. The cabinet plus advisory and then a scrutiny with it, it's not completely broken, but I think it may just be a different way of looking at it. And I think that is perfectly acceptable. We're not doing this in the first 6 months of the whole system being in place. We're saying we've looked at it, we've worked with it, and it lacks X, Y. That's why we've got the changes to the Constitution that are in the back of these very papers. We are looking at them. It is something that changes. It is something that progresses. But you can only do it when you're working with it. So I think the point of saying we shouldn't change it until we get new people and get their feet under the desk may be the other end of the telescope. And I think if we're going to do this, it would be better to get something in place that does work and that has been looked through and checked that the T's and the dots are in the right place. Workable is the best way. Easy to use is what I hope the easier constitution. So you look up a problem, you find where it takes you and what you need to apply to it. That's what I mean by easier to use. Yes, it's lovely to have everything written in Latin, I'm exaggerating, but just so that our legal people can understand it, it's better to have something that we can use and is functional. Councillor English pointed out at the beginning, there are ways to use it, but you just don't know how that is. You're not doing it effectively. Well, why? We didn't necessarily have a training session where we said, here are these scenarios, here's how to use the Constitution. So I think that's all I'm saying. If we're going to make a change, I don't see a reason to not do it now and have it in place so that someone picks it up and has to work with it.
Now, Councillor Cox, if things were written in Latin, they'd be slightly easier to interpret and there would be less ambiguity. I'm going to come back to Councillor Garton because he indicated first, and then I think Councillor English wants to tell you that you slightly misinterpreted and misrepresented what he said, but I'm sure you did it tongue-in-cheek regardless. Councillor Garton.
The current model is tried and tested for almost 2 years now, and it works very well. And we've got a very efficient, very competent democratic services team who steered us very well over the last 2 years. So we have a system which works. Now, if you take a group of children and want to teach them swimming, would you take them to the local pool where you're familiar with the waters, or would you take them to a river you've never been to? I think we all would settle for the local pool.
That was very enlightening. Thank you, Councillor Garton. Councillor English, can you top that?
I cannot top Councillor Garton's coaching experience, as I know he holds several winter sports coaching qualifications, so I do not hold any. So I would not wish to try and top that expertise. The inability of councillors across the piece to use the current constitution has very little to do with the language it's in, and a great deal to do with a lack of confidence in using certain mechanisms. It is something I've already flagged up to the Chief Executive as a serious training need for new councillors next year. I'm seriously concerned about rushing to any. I think there may be some issues that we can talk about in terms of ease of use of the Constitution, but I would not want to rush out and go for an easier language version. It sounds superficially attractive, but actually the language in constitutions is something that has to be very, very considered, and has been very, very considered. So I think this is a debate we perhaps should return to, but I would not want to see it move forward tonight. But for various reasons. So I would hope that we could agree that we should leave matters as they are for the time being, but definitely there will be issues that are flagged up with the reduced number of members, but I do think democratically, to a very large extent, we as the outgoing council should not be determining too much detail about how essentially a new body of people, a very substantially new body of people, should be operating.
Thank you very much. Nobody else has indicated. We have a proposal on the table which is seconded. And if I paraphrase, the proposal is not to make a recommendation to full council, to essentially keep the current governance arrangements, which is proposed by Councillor English, seconded by Councillor Webb. All those in favour? Those against? And by my mathematics, there will be no abstentions. Therefore, that motion is carried, and we will have this conversation in a room such as this in about 10 months' time. I can't wait. Well, should we run a book on who might be here, Councillor Cox? Thank you, members. Right, now we move on to the very light subject of the governance. Sorry, not the governance room. No. So apologies, there is a second. The next one, which I think we have dealt with by saying that there will be no changes, but just to be very pedantic, on the second thought, we have to consider whether a new, easier to use and apply version of the Constitution to assist new members following the all-out elections in 2024 should be developed. Now, I won't propose it from the chair, but does anyone have any comment on that? I think we've discussed it, so does anyone want to propose that we do write a new one or don't? Councillor English proposes we don't. That's seconded by Councillor Webb. No one has indicated to speak. All of those in favour of the proposal? All of those against? Was that against Councillor Jeffrey or Sorry? 4. Oh, apologies. Sorry, I think, Councillor Joe, I think you've misunderstood. I think you're voting against the proposal, which is not to write a new constitution. So the proposal is that we don't write a new constitution. Yes, so all of those in favour of the proposal, we'll go again. Keep your hand down. All of those against, put your hand up. No, it doesn't make any difference. Are there any abstentions? I don't see any. Apologies for that. I completely forgot the second recommendation, so I didn't mean to make you look silly, and if anything, it reflects more poorly on my chairman's skills than yours.
You don't need any skills to make me look silly, I can assure you.
No comment. Right, we now move on to the very light topic of amendments to the Constitution. Now, these tend to be much more minor amendments than what we've just discussed. So I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Woodhouse to introduce her report.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as members will be aware, this committee has responsibility for reviewing and amending the Constitution. Alongside this, the Monitoring Officer has delegation to amend the Constitution for minor changes, and these changes have been set out in the table on page 37. So you've got a list there of changes to note that are minor amendments that have been made. So it'd be things like typos or consequential changes that needed to be picked up, or clarity. The report also contains proposals for the committee to consider for change, and there are 6 proposals included in the report. Track changes have been included in the appendix for each item, so you can see quite clearly what we're putting forward. Most are fairly straightforward, however there are 2 I will highlight. So item 2, motions on notice, we have included 2 sets of wording for consideration by the committee, and the proposed change here is to ensure council can deal with motions on the night and in accordance with the will of the council, because it's quite complicated at the moment, and it's actually quite difficult for council to deal with things as council. It sort of has to follow the route that's prescribed, whereas we used to have allow the mayor to sort of use their discretion. So it's really trying to simplify that. Item 6, visiting members. This actually concerns the rights of visiting members to attend when the meeting moves into part 2. So currently, determination obviously sits with the chairman, so that remains, but it states it's on advice of the monitoring officer or their representative. Obviously, when this was written, we're just trying to clarify what was meant by or their representative. So we would suggest we add in on advice of the monitoring officer, or in their absence, the most senior officer present. But it's really up to the chair who they seek advice from, and it's still the chair's decision. We're just trying to make it a bit clearer so people know where to go in the meeting, because Russell will not be at every committee meeting. He has a life. So we're trying to cover it off. I know, it's shocking. Make him come. So yeah, so that's the 2 I'd highlight, but I understand you might want to go through them one at a time and then have the discussion.
Thank you. Please do, Councillor Cox.
If the chairman says, yes, that's fine, could it be overridden by the legal person sitting there saying, I would advise not to do that? Okay, not me specifically. Yeah.
On occasion, chairmen do go against the advice handed to them by officers. What I propose we do, and I really don't want to protract matters, but I do think it's important that we address each thing individually, because otherwise I think we will get tangled in knots, because there are 7 different things on here. So first and foremost, there is a list of changes which have been made under Russell Fitzpatrick's delegation. Does anyone have any objection to any of those first? I don't. Good, because I didn't see anything in there. And Russell looks quite relieved. Fine. And I'll try to remember at the end. One of the recommendations is that we note those. I'm going to suggest that we go through each of these individually, if we may. I think that's just easiest. So the first proposal is the cancellation of minutes, and that's to allow the proper officer to change the meeting date when required. Does anyone have any comment on this? No. in that case, I assume we're all happy with that one, but we won't take a vote. We'll vote on them at the end. Second is motions on notice to council. So that's about changing the protocol for motions on notice. Councillor Jeffrey, you have a comment on this?
Yeah, two brief comments. In terms of the option 2 of 2, option B 2, it says in consultation with the leader. I just wonder if there is something about consultation with the proposer as well. It just feels it's a consultation, so it's nothing drastic, but it would just be interesting, or I think better to have the proposer of the motion being consulted. I think generally, though, I think this helps clarify the process a bit. I have used the process a few times, and I still struggle with it, and try to make myself look as stupid as I possibly can when I do it. There is still a problem with the motions to full council, in that it's very difficult to word it so that the council, the full council, gives an opinion. And I really would have liked some way of the council expressing opinion, rather than just having the leader of the council in the cabinet being able to express the opinion of the council. Perhaps the councillors having an opinion. But this motion, this proposal doesn't do that, I don't think. So we're probably going to have to stick with the difficult way of wording some of the motions for the time being. But perhaps next time we could have a look and see if there is a way of doing that, perhaps.
I'm not suggesting that we do, but we don't have to take any recommendation this evening. It can be deferred, and I would suggest that if we're thinking that we'll tinker with it again, it might just be best dealt with in one go at the next meeting. Personally, you know, I'm not wedded to any of these particular rules, but I think sometimes we vote for something because it's the least bad option. Whilst we shouldn't always let the perfect be the enemy of the good, sometimes we can allow for the perfect to come along. Russell Fitzpatrick was going to explain why. Oh, sorry, Ryan was. Ryan, even better.
Councillor Jeffrey, the purpose of referring to the leader in that particular part is because it relates to 12.9, which is a motion that comes within the province of any cabinet function. So because the intention, which is currently there, is that it flows to cabinet, the mayor is essentially consulting the person that it would go to say, are you okay if we deal with this on the night? And likewise with the relevant committee chairman for a motion to which 12.10 applies, because it would be flowing to that committee. So it's just that the mayor is actually consulting with the relevant person who would otherwise take it, because we found several circumstances where the people who are ultimately going to be receiving the motion would actually prefer for it to be dealt with at council. So that really it's just trying to reflect that in the consultation that's proposed.
Please, Councillor Jeffrey.
Okay, so that the last bit you said would prefer it to be dealt with at council. Does this the changes allow for it to be a motion to be dealt with at council?
Yes, provided that the mayor determines it that way, and obviously, you know, it hinges on that determination, but it would be taking the advice of the relevant body that it would otherwise go to.
Councillor English, were you indicating? Yes, you are.
Yes, I think that I wouldn't want to defer this, because actually I think it's actually quite hard to structure something unless it relates to an overall policy position where the council is the body that makes the policy, and there are things reserved to the council that are policy for the council. So it would actually be quite hard to structure something which would enable the council to just give an opinion, because that is essentially quite difficult because of the legislation that says what things are executive and what are non-executive functions, and also those that make sure that and the other danger, I think, is that one might stray into the functions which are regulatory. I would hate for the council, in fact I think it'd be very dangerous if the council were asked, and we have been asked on one occasion, unfortunately the rules did not allow us to do that, or an opinion on a planning issue or a licensing issue. That'd be very dangerous. I think so we've got to be very careful, and I think the reasons that council is restricted from giving an opinion to those areas which it is responsible for as policy are with those partly with those concerns in mind. So I would not want to structure something like that. I think it would be potentially quite dangerous and open the council up to some serious challenges.
Absolutely, I agree, particularly on the planning application example. But I think it is the reverse of those situations you need to look at, where council doesn't want to move something through to another body to deal with. It wants to just dispose of it, i.e. this motion isn't something that we want to have to deal with. And at the moment it can't. Council cannot say, we do not want to instruct Cabinet to look at this. And that, to me, seems to hamstring council from a function that it should have.
Misunderstood me, Mr. O'Connor. I wasn't speaking against this motion as it sits here. I was speaking against deferring it to actually put in something about a wider policy discussion remit. I'm content with the proposal here, and I think we could still get to the position of the Mayor determining it now, but it is complicated, so I do think it is wise to go for this simplification.
Councillor Cox, before I bring you in, I'm just a bit confused. Are we suggesting so far, the two speakers, that we go for option B or option A? I will bring you in, Councillor Cox, apologies.
I was going with option B.
Option B, right, fine. Councillor Cox.
I'm trying to put this into a scenario in my head about how it would work and how it would go through at council. If this is on papers that a proposal is put forward, and we're saying that it's down to the Mayor to pull it or how he guides it, why wouldn't all of this taken part before the meeting? Because you can see what's on the proposal. Why wouldn't it be, well, we don't actually have to include it?
Presumably it won't look as good in the Kent Messenger if it gets conducted before the council meeting, but perhaps Ryan could give the technical answer.
So, in most cases, I would expect it to be resolved before we get to council. Council is something we structure because obviously it has 55 councillors at it, so we need to structure it as well as we can. That does include a briefing with the Mayor beforehand, and also there is communication that goes on beforehand. And often we hear that maybe a motion doesn't, somebody, like the leader for example, doesn't want a motion to have to come to Cabinet. They'd rather deal with it at council as the sovereign body. So if that was the case, then this rule would allow that, because it says very clearly this determination may be made before any meeting where the motion is to be considered, or during the meeting, including at the end of the debate. Because it could be that you didn't realise it wanted to be done, and everyone gets up in arms about something, says there's no way we want to deal with this. Well, the Mayor would rightly then have the power to sort of step in and consult with people and decide, actually, should we determine this tonight? Or we would do that beforehand, because this does allow for that specifically.
So therefore, what Councillor Jeffrey said was, why wouldn't you do that whilst talking or involving the proposer? Because at least then they would go, well, actually, I can see what you're saying. This doesn't really need to do it. It would go that, therefore I can ask to have this put onto an agenda of that committee. And if you're not going to let it go through the debate process at full council, at least you could give the advice to the proposing the matter, putting it the proposer, and therefore we don't have all this happening before anyway.
So we can get some complex examples, really, which we need to kind of veer away from, but we can't predetermine what the outcome of a council meeting is going to be. And in many instances, so whether a Mayor determines it's going to be dealt with on the night or not, we don't know what council would ultimately determine. It's for 55 members to vote on it. So we couldn't advise a proposer that their motion will go one way or the other before a meeting, because it is ultimately for council to determine that, whatever route they take, whether they knock it onto Cabinet or not. Now, at the moment, as Councillor Jeffrey knows, because we have these conversations when a motion comes in, I explain that please be aware that your motion will not be able to be determined by council as it's currently set out, because it contains an executive function. It will therefore need to go to a policy advisory committee, who would then make the recommendation to the executive, unless you decide to use the rule that allows a vote to be taken on whether it goes to the executive or not. And if that falls, the whole motion falls on the night. The person putting in the motion can then determine if they want to continue with that. So we would absolutely advise someone on what the process is that we would follow with their motion, but we cannot ultimately take that to its conclusion, because the conclusion is for council to decide what happens.
Thank you very much. Next indicating I have from Councillor Webb.
Yes, I have listened to the debate across the floor. And given it consideration, can I propose option B, please?
Thank you. Is that seconded by Councillor English? Is there any other discussion on this particular change? In that case, if we're happy, can we deal with that now? So the proposal is that we take option B, which complex and specific style of the current constitution, and then the wording as per the bottom of page 39 and the top of page 40. All those in favour? I think that is unanimous. Fabulous. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The next item we take is an amendment to Part C1, Appendix A, the Council's petition scheme. So that's to provide clarifications to the rules of procedure, and it's proposed that Part C1 of the Council Procedure Rules, Appendix A, the Council's petition scheme, be amended as per what is in the papers here. Does anyone have any comment on this particular item? No? Oppose? Councillor Webb?
Seconded.
Seconded. Fabulous. Any disagreement? Anyone wants? No? All in favour? Agreed? Unanimous? Perfect. We're making pace now. Councillor Webb, if you wouldn't mind turning your microphone off. Thank you. Just in case you were to say something rude about the chairman. I probably heard worse. Item number 4 is members as substitutes on committees, which is not quite as the title suggests, but I think we all understand that. Does anyone have any comment on this? Councillor English?
This is essentially what we do anyway, so it makes sense. Propose it.
Seconded by Councillor Webb. All those in agreement? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 5, notice of meetings and business to be discussed relating to overview and scrutiny. Any comments? Chairman of overview and scrutiny.
This just makes it easier because, frankly, although there would probably be very little business under the other agenda headings, it would be possible to sort of theoretically ambush the committee meeting, which would not be a very clever thing to do. So it makes less work for everyone as well. So let's do this. I propose it.
Seconded by Councillor Webb. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 6, visiting members, in order to provide clarification as who the replacement will be. I think we've already discussed this, but is there any further comment, Councillor English?
It doesn't make it's fine as reworded. I don't think it necessarily needed it, but I'm reasonably happy with the changes, frankly. So.
Seconded by Councillor Webb again. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item number 7, which is the protocol for reviewing overview and scrutiny committee reports, Part C2, paragraph 13.3, currently states blah blah blah. Any comment on this, Councillor English?
I believe that there are occasionally cases for conferring this honour posthumously, and and we have done that.
Back up.
Protocol on honorary aldermen. Oh, sorry. It's, no, I don't. I'm quite happy with that. Sorry, I thought we'd already done. That's my fault.
Thank you very much. Rather embarrassingly, I think I voted for something further previously that I wasn't that keen on, but never mind. It's not going to be too fundamental. Last, but by no means least, number 8 is... Oh, sorry, we didn't vote on that. Sorry, we did... Right. Would anyone like to second? Who'd proposed that one? I will second it. All those in agreement? Yeah. Put your hand up, yeah. Thank you. I tell you what, I can't wait to tell the journalists at the Kent Messenger that I tell the leader of the Green Group how to vote these days. Long may it last. Number 8.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. My enthusiasm ran away with me.
No, not a problem at all. Number 8 is the protocol on honorary aldermen. Councillor English.
I think there are always going to be awkward, difficult, and sometimes tragic circumstances, and we are all aware of what happened where Councillor Hinder, who should have been mayor, was unable to become mayor. It seemed to me entirely appropriate that the action was taken to award her this posthumous honour. It is not something I think should ever be done lightly. Awarding this honour when people are still alive should be done sparingly, otherwise it becomes a cheap gesture. And I'm not very much, and I think gestures should be expensive ones if one's going to do it. But there are going to be difficult circumstances, tragic circumstances sometimes. So I actually do believe that we should leave the door open to dealing with exceptional circumstances. We shouldn't be too prescriptive. The council at the time must decide on an individual vote of conscience, no whips involved, on what constitutes exceptional circumstances. And that's my view.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
That's the only thing I was going to raise. We've used exceptional and not actually set out, but then Councillor English has just said we shouldn't make it a list of things that people have done. So, yeah. Okay.
Councillor Webb.
I have to say I would much prefer the wording of in exceptional circumstances not to be put in. It's all about, in the future, all about interpretation of what exceptional circumstances are in one person's mind or another. I think we should just leave it as it is, because anyone that is proposed to be an alderman, I think it is for the council at that time. And anyone bringing it forward would need to have consummate reasons for the proposal. I think by adding in exceptional circumstances leaves it up to interpretation of what exceptional circumstances are, and exceptional circumstances for one person and not the same as another. So I'm not in favour of adding that in like that. Thank you.
For what it's worth, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with the current wording, but Ryan wants to, if you could give it a little bit of clarity, that'd be great.
So there isn't a clear legal position on whether or not you can award this honour to somebody posthumously. So it's a matter of kind of risk. So to manage that risk, when we did this last time, we took it for a separate decision at council to decide to veer away from its own stated policy. By including other than in exceptional circumstances, the policy itself allows for those. And you're right, it would be council at the time when awarding it that would determine whether it is exceptional circumstances, just like it determines actually in the award of freedom of the borough whether somebody has done sufficient to be awarded it. So all it really manages is that risk. And I mean, it's not a great risk by any means. I mean, who's going to challenge a council about awarding this to somebody? But that's the purpose, is to have a policy that has it stated in there to have that flexibility so that we can automatically flex that as an option for council to take should it want to. So that's why I've suggested the amendment.
I'm going to come to Councillor Webb and then I will come to you, Councillor English.
Yeah, I can understand that, but I think given the only experience that I've got, as Councillor English described moments earlier, when we did award aldermanship to Councillor Hinder, I think that the whole council agreed, because it was absolutely the right thing to do for the council to do. And they were exceptional circumstances. So at the time, whoever the proposer is, who puts forward a motion to propose an aldermanship, it's fairly clear that it should be in exceptional circumstances, but I really don't think we should put that in writing. I think it's the wrong way to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Webb, I come to Councillor English, then to Councillor Garden.
My preference for changing it is because I actually think it's a very bad principle to set aside one's own policies. As a principle, I think that's wrong. To actually set aside one's policies, set aside that policy, what else can we set aside if the majority of the council happens to think? It sets, in my personal opinion, a very bad precedent to set aside one's policies, and that's why, having considered it, I did not want to take that course of action. I think it's a very bad course of action. I think, as a general principle, suspending policies, suspending standing orders, is not the right thing in any circumstance to do unless you absolutely have no choice. And in my entire local government career, I've been against it as a principle, and that's why I took the stance I did. I know we can do it, I just think it's an appalling thing to do, and that's why I would prefer the policy to include the exceptional circumstance rather than to have to set aside a policy in order to get the exceptional circumstance. I don't think it's a good principle, but it's not particularly related to this matter. I just think it's a bad principle.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Garden.
I think I should agree with Councillor English. I do see Councillor Webb's point that what is exceptional, and all too often in today's society, rather minor or obvious things or regular things suddenly be declared as exceptional. I mean, we could maybe strengthen the exception by writing very exceptional, or at the worst, even seek for 2/3 majority of the council to make this exceptional point exceptional.
The consensus here is that you're not allowed to request a 2/3 rule. I think that would go against the Local Government Act 2000. In terms of writing very personally, I think exceptional doesn't really require any strengthening. It's either exceptional or it isn't, but if people want to change it, then I'm not going to stand in the way. Personally, I'd rather leave it as it is, but I don't think that's the strength of feeling here, and ultimately I'm not sure it matters too much. I don't know that anyone has proposed anything, but for the sake of sort of listening to what's in the room, may I propose that we go with that recommendation? If someone's happy to second. I think Councillor Wilkerson got there first. All those in favour? All those against? The proposal is carried. Now, members, what we have to do, there are two recommendations at the beginning of this committee item. So one is that the use of the monitoring officer's delegation to amend the constitution outlined in Appendix 1 to the report be noted. Assume that's noted, members. Thank you. And yeah, mostly uncontroversial. And then the second recommendation is that the committee consider the proposed amendments outlined in Appendix 1 to the report, make amendments as required for their approval to the council. So if perhaps wholesale I can approve that, I can propose, I don't know if I can propose that we take the amendments we just discussed, so technically I can. You had a hand in writing that constitution, Councillor English. So I propose that we do what we've just agreed. Could Councillor English, thank you. All those in favour? Some people may be against. Yeah. Yes, Councillor English. Garton.
We did not actually vote initially on the cancellation of meetings that date. You sort of skipped over that. So is that included now with our?
Yes, that is included. Vote? Yeah, everyone said yes. But
yeah, just for clarity.
No. Yeah, I took a slightly different tack with that one. In fairness, so the proposal seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Well, we have a majority. Thank you very much for bearing with me this evening, members. I now declare this meeting closed.